Welcome to How to Beat the Difference with your hosts, Joanna and Paul. A podcast for the career you want, or maybe just that push you need. If you want to know what your dream career looks like, join us to get inspiration from industry experts that will make that dream career a reality.
Hello and welcome to How to Beat the Difference with your hosts, Paul Lenski and
Joanna Molina.
Joanna, how are you?
I'm very well, Paul. What have you been up to? What's the crack?
What's the crack?
What's the crack?
What's the crack? That's good. Yeah. Well, there's not much crack actually. I suppose like Ireland is slowly, we're slowly opening up again. July marks the last month of coming out of transition, so hospitality is opening up. We've got all the tourists back on, so tourists are slowly coming in towards the end of summer. And we something that's really significant to Ireland, and if you haven't been to Ireland, or even if you have been, or you just know, I suppose, that pubs are a big part of the culture, like for good or for bad. And now pubs are opening back up, and it's been, it must have been since this all happened, like 16 months, and bars haven't been open. So as you can imagine, they'll be very busy with their bookings this weekend.
Totally. I hear even the birds chirping as you say that.
I know. You swear, I'm just sitting in an apartment. You think I'm in a nature reserve with the amount of bird activity outside the window. But yeah, no. All excited to get back to normal here. And I'm hoping everybody who's listening in is safe and everything's getting back a bit better where they are.
Yes. That's a really big point. I hope the same. And we have a really good guest today, very interesting guest, very impressive, a woman that I actually, I've been following her career for a while and admire.
And just to jump in there, Joanna, as well, because I couldn't believe how impressive this woman was. And when we originally spoke to her, we kind of had in mind, this is the way we'd like the conversation to go. And we kind of went off in different directions. It was all excellent, but finding out some of the things that she said, like about future laws and plans that she has to keep in mind for the career she's had. She's almost had enough careers for a lifetime for other people, 3 full careers nearly. So absolutely excellent speaking to her. And I suppose we'll just jump straight into it. First, I have to give everyone a little push in the right direction, and please rate and subscribe the podcast. It helps more people listen to this. So take it away, Joanna.
Today we are with Irene Arias Hofman. Irene is a Spanish national with more than 25 years of experience working at multilateral organizations. Irene is the CEO of the Inter-American Development Bank Lab, or IDB Lab, the Inter-American Development Bank Group Innovation Laboratory. Irene leads a purpose-driven multidisciplinary team that fosters innovation for inclusion in Latin America and the Caribbean. Previously, she worked for 20 years at the World Bank, Group, where she managed the IFC, or International Finance Corporations, with the largest portfolio of around $16 billion. Irene holds a bachelor degree in economics, a master's in international relations from Johns Hopkins University, and a master's in advanced European studies from the College of Europe. And she's a CFA charter holder. And personally, I have to say she's super inspirational in every single event that I've seen that is related to development, international development, innovation. She's usually a panelist. So I'm very happy to have you, Irene, with us in the podcast today. How are you? Whereabouts in the world are you right now?
Thank you, Joanna. Washington, D.C., Maryland to be precise, but in the Washington, D.C. area.
That's fantastic. Okay, so as I told you before we started, the idea is to go through a journey today. And let's start by knowing a bit more about yourself. So who is Irene, and anything you'd like to share about your background, who you were as a child, as a student?
Thanks. So grew up in Madrid, and was born in Madrid. I I have my father is from Spain, my mother is from Holland. So from an early age, and because also my father, who worked at the European Space Agency in Holland, where he met my mom, and then continued his career in aviation, I traveled and was pretty much around the world from a very early age, but always until about 20 years old, based in Madrid with my 3 siblings and my parents. But certainly this aspect of getting to know the world and understanding and getting excited about, like, what's happening in different parts of the world, and the opportunities to discover and be curious about different cultures. And at the time when I finished school and I was in the middle of university, all the changes that we were seeing firsthand in Eastern Europe and the end of communism and so on was something that sparked a lot more curiosity. And since traveling seemed so natural, hopping on a plane, getting to see, or starting my first year abroad, first in Belgium, then in Poland, to be exactly in the midst of all that change, seemed sort of came about very, very naturally. So that was the beginning. And then after that, in Poland, I completed a master's degree in international relations, international law, at the College of Europe, which prepared students for mostly working in European institutions and the European Commission and the like. But I was particularly interested in what was going on in transition countries and wanted to go a bit deeper into that. So I studied Russian for a long time, and I continued my postgrad and going deeper into that area with international relations at SAIS, both in Bologna and then in the US. And that's what brought me to the US for the first time. And that was in 99 when I first came to the US as a professional and to finish my last part of that degree. I had been in the US during high school for a period of time. But really, the beginning of my professional life in the US started in 99, where I began working with a professor at SAIS while I was finishing the second part of that postgrad degree at SAIS. And the world of international relations led to the world of international finance. I started working at the World Bank first, but within the World Bank, it was already very connected to what my work would become later, which was private finance and the role of private sector in development and financial institutions in particular, because I joined the World Bank through CIGAP, the consultative group to assist the poorest, which was leading work in the microfinance industry. And soon I went to the Small and Medium Enterprise Department, and that led to going from the working in development from the public side of the World Bank Group to the private arm, to the International Finance Corporation. I began there to focus mainly on how to promote small enterprises through programs more related to technical cooperation, capacity building and the like, and public policy, but working through the private sector to influence good public policy to promote small enterprises. What I discovered very quickly is that a lot of the change can happen in a much more tangible way when you work much more directly with the private sector and with financing products that are more that include investments and an expectation of return, and this notion of like doing well, doing good. And that's why at that point I had in those few years risen quite quickly in the organization on the advisory side, but I decided to move to the investment side of the institution, of the IFC, which was really the bread and butter of the institution, and where, again, you are driven by results. There is a business to be done, and you can do good, but there has to be a really good business and investment thesis behind it. And I discovered that was really my sweet spot. I deepened much more my career in finance from then on. I took some time to transfer to the investment track, but I had this sort of view that this is what I wanted to do longer term. So it didn't matter if I sort of stayed at the same level for a few years in order to kind of catch up on the investment side and work finally the rest of my career in finance. And I did the CFA for that reason as well, to build up a little more the technical track on pure finance. So the rest, it was much more linear, went up in terms of my finance career at IFC from within mostly the financial institutions group, which I ended up leading as global director, and then also taking a role as regional director at IFC for Latin America and the Caribbean, overseeing all the sectors, all the business of IFC in that region. And by that time, I was leading the Latin American Caribbean region for IFC from Bogota. Always loved to be based in the field during those 20 years. So that time that I just summarized was about 20 years. And I was based in various parts of the world, from Istanbul to Johannesburg to other parts. But the final stretch was in Colombia. And that's where a headhunter called me and said, how about joining the IDB and running their innovation lab? And my curiosity part of me just basically went off, and I investigated a bit more what the mandate was. I loved it, and I've been now at the IDB for 3 years, and really happy to have made that jump.
Wow, Irene, I feel like you're just giving us an incredible summary of your very impressive and adventurous, exciting life. I want to take you quickly back to a very specific moment, because for our audience, it will be important to know, what was that moment where you actually started getting interested? You talk a little bit about the changes happening in Europe at that time, that you got actually that moment where you started getting interested in helping other people in the developing world, and that this career was for you. Is there a story there that you can share with us?
I want to think that I was raised in an environment where compassion is a big thing, and doing good in general. So I think we had sort of those values in the family to begin with. But I had also been exposed to many different realities because of the ability to travel, thanks to my dad's job in the airline industry, and seen the reality very quickly in different places where living conditions were so different, and went to different parts of Latin America, even at the age of 8, 9, and seeing the contrast, I think inevitably starts leaving something right in you, of trying to do something about it. And what I probably didn't know was how important it was for me to be able to do that, but also doing it again with a sense of business as well. So it's not enough that doing good in a kind of just pure charitable way if it's not sustainable, for example, no? So I think the drive to do good, I even remember when I was doing my first communion, I was actually 6 because I'm the youngest of 4, and we're 1 year apart. So my sister, who was 7 at the time, and I did it together. So it was, at least for Spanish standards, it was a little early, but I had to say what I committed to do. And I was not very tall and the youngest of the kids, but I stood up and I said, I want to help others. And but I think it's something that was, again, very much in the way that we were raised, and my other siblings have also devoted a lot of time in terms of doing a lot of work that has some kind of social impact. So that was there from the very beginning. I just didn't know how it would turn out, how I would do it in a way that also made sense to me and that I thought was effective. And when I discovered and slowly gravitated towards the world of development finance and working through the private sector to solve development challenges, is where I thought that, okay, the pieces are sort of, those two pieces fit together for me. And I do a lot of work now, certainly on the innovation space and tech, where we partner with governments, but having a foot with the private sector gives that sense of having the discipline and the business drivers to make things happen, and the momentum and the traction to see results that sometimes it's harder to see on the public side. So it's a combination that have been really my sweet spot, and simply because I think it's a way of being effective.
There's something that's very interesting, and it's about that correlation you just mentioned between private and public sector. What would you say for people that have no idea about how that works? What is it like to be in the public sector and then move into the private sector?
The incentives are very different. I think you see people with a huge sense of public side, of course, and that's often very, very motivating. And during the pandemic, it's been incredible. We've seen it in so many different public institutions, how they've responded, and they've opened up to partner with us, to partner with other players in the private sector. In the private sector, you have a sense of risk-taking and of business results that helps focus. And I think, this world where we are in, we have one foot on the public side and one in the private side is really ideal, because you get the best of both. And working, for example, within the private sector, there are also huge differences, right, between more of the entrepreneurial startup community and the more corporate world of the private sector, including the financial sector. I started my career more, supporting small enterprises indirectly, but I had never, like today, spent so much time embedded in the entrepreneurial community and entrepreneurs that are mostly tech-driven and are trying mostly to do disruptive innovation, turning sort of complex and expensive things into things that are simple and that people can access. And so within the private sector, I think one has to also understand those differences and the agility that you get and the spirit of innovation and changing the world that you get when you interact with entrepreneurs, versus the more established corporate sector, where sometimes you do have intrapreneurs or people obviously with a lot of an innovation spirit within that, but for the most part it's a very different culture. So I think for anyone wondering whether to work with or start in the private sector, I think knowing yourself and knowing what drives you, it's very, very important to maybe test more of an entrepreneurial journey or getting more into the corporate world.
That's brilliant. And you spoke about change and doing well and doing good. And I suppose, was there a moment or a time where you helped someone or a business or something within your career that really stood out for you, that you knew you were on the right path?
So I'll give maybe a recent example. We are working with an entrepreneur called Ivan Caballero. He's the founder of a company out of Barcelona called CityBits. Really a great example of a social entrepreneur. So earlier established a company called Social Coin, and but with CityBits, him and the team leverage natural language processing and big data and AI to generate insights into what are, for example, citizens' concerns in a particular country. With the IDB, they built a tool called Civiclytics that is a bit of like an observatory of public sentiment, of what citizens really prioritize in their countries as their top concerns. And it's a real-time tool that can be used for directing or prioritizing the use of public resources, for example. So when we support entrepreneurs, we look first and foremost at the teams behind them. It's tends to be the number one factor of success or not, and also their motivation and what they want to achieve, their business model and the technology. But starting with a team, and I like this particular team very much. Then they constantly making introductions and connecting them with other companies in the portfolio. So in addition to having funded them directly, we are, and I'm personally sort of not just with them, but it's just an example of somebody that I have top of mind to try to make connections, sometimes opening doors and opening market opportunities for an entrepreneur that is also pursuing such an important goal is even more important than the funding itself. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And you get it back in spades, because this sense of partnership, where far from just being a financial investor in his company, we are really partners. But when I mean investors, I mean as IDB Lab, not obviously as a personal investment. It has generated a lot of commitment from him as well and his team to be part of initiatives where we're trying to move the needle on important issues of foundational issues of the type of world we want to live in. And what I mean by that is we are, the digital economy is accelerating at an incredible pace. Adoption of digital solutions is increasing faster than ever. Also partly, driven by what happened during the pandemic and complete transformation of the education system and the health system, but generally as well. And so you have an abundance of new companies that are very data driven, but often manage sensitive data on people. And if we don't set the foundations right for what kind of society we want, what kind of digital rights we want, we want people to have, we may end up with, good solutions that have total unintended consequences, from digital divide of more excluded population to simply violation of data privacy rights of the individual, right? So we want to support all this innovation, but we want to do it on the right foundation and with the right lens and standards. There are many high-level frameworks of the use of artificial intelligence, the use of data and data privacy. But how do you actually put that in practice? If how do you, if you are an entrepreneur, what do you do with that? Mean in terms of how do you apply it to your business model, and what does it mean in terms of, when you hear about algorithmic biases or algorithmic transparency or things like that? How do you actually make that and translate that into plain language and something that you can build into your model? And for example, to avoid that the data that your model is using, to avoid biases, so that the decisions that it suggests or leads to are not reflective of a biased sample and lead to the wrong decisions. So this entrepreneur went out of his way to be part of a cohort to co-create these tools with us, and now has been well recognized as that, and it's a pioneer. I think in the future there is no investor in the world that is not going to look at this dimension. And just like today, most investors, including commercial investors like BlackRock, say, we want to invest only if the companies are ESG compliant, like environmental, social governance, and contribute to the sustainable development goals. Tomorrow, they're going to add this dimension of if you're a data-driven company, how are you really looking at these aspects? And so this is something that is really motivating, because you see that if you work as a partner with whoever you're working with, and you get a lot back. And this is an example of what happened with this particular company.
Is that the most difficult aspect of your job currently, which is you almost have to look into the future and come up with things aren't, there's no laws against these things yet, so you almost have to be very, very sure of what it is you're doing. Would that be the most difficult aspect, or is there other roadblocks that come in the way of these investments?
That's such a great question. It's a very, very important aspect, and that's why we cannot be afraid to fail, because otherwise you would be paralyzed and just do things the old way. So we do have to sometimes take certain risks and also be patient, and also be very methodical in terms of and very analytical. So we've know that in the last years, companies that have raised more than $1 million in Latin America and the Caribbean in the startup ecosystem, they've generated like $220 billion in value, and traditional companies have lost twice that in the same period. And that companies that are driven by AI, big data, that are leveraging all of the new technologies, deep techs, we are very, very heavily invested in blockchain and looking at the future of this internet of value and how to make it happen is the future. And we have enough evidence to know that just looking at the trends over the last few years and the rate of adoption, that this is only going to accelerate. But it's still, it still takes, you have to trust your instincts as well. And, often we try to say, my hope is that at least as an organization at IDB Lab, we are not hierarchical at all, and we can become a team of teams, and that each team pursues one of these frontiers. And, they know more or less some of the parameters, but within those parameters, they can sort of go and try to unleash that potential, unlock that potential of that new frontier. This is something that we're doing, for example, on blockchain, and we pushed ahead with the proof of concept of what has now become the most important alliance for the development of the blockchain ecosystem in the region 2.5 years later. But when we approved it, it was, there was so much skepticism by many, and it was quite uncharted. And so it's also, we knew the direction in which we wanted to take it, and the fact that this technology can be the future, the internet of value and a huge benefit to society, and if we want to promote inclusive digital growth. But how to get there, and it was relatively unknown, and we've been discovering along the way. So having the space to experiment and having the space to be able to learn as you build is really, really important, and it's not easy or possible to do in every organizational setting. That's why I mentioned earlier, for example, for anyone listening who's trying to figure out which kind of way to go, to know what motivates you and what drives you, and how comfortable you are with uncertainty. Because in this space, certainly there is like huge amounts of uncertainty, and either it paralyzes you or it motivates you. And in our team, for the most part, it's a self-selected group of people who find that motivating.
And so, yes, you mentioned today's world, which is very uncertain, that's for sure. What are those skills that you think are very important to succeed in this modern world? You mentioned curiosity, you mentioned compassion. What are those skills for us to succeed and not be paralyzed with what is about to happen, the unknown?
Definitely to be open to learn continuously, because the world is changing at a faster and faster pace every day. And I think being able to, it's not so much to reinvent yourself, but to learn new things, that harnessing that and being constantly curious and able to learn new things, it's more important than ever, I think. Ability to collaborate effectively. Not just to collaborate for the sake of collaboration, but to collaborate effectively. If you've read Adam Kahan, he talks about stretch collaboration. So that type of collaboration in relatively complex settings, and where you have not necessarily upfront a clear alignment of interest, and also working with people from multiple disciplines. Solutions today don't necessarily come from people within the same industry. And we've seen that in banking, for example. No, when I first started the journey of turning from more like coming from the public sector side of the World Bank Group to working in finance and with financial institutions at IFC, the world of banking then is a totally different world of banking today. And many people in banking are not long-term career bankers. In fact, banks, as we know them, are going to disappear. And so I think being open to work with people from very different disciplines, it's also extremely important. To be aware that the solutions may come from very unexpected places, that the best solution for financial inclusion in Latin America and the Caribbean comes from an e-commerce platform. It doesn't come from a bank. and just being more being open to in that sense a slightly more chaotic world, no, of like chaos and some order, but not as straightforward or contained in standalone industries as it used to be.
That's really interesting. And I was just actually, I'm really curious, because you're on the front line of like all this innovation and all these new products and new things coming together. How do you see the world post-pandemic?
It's hard to answer the question in a general sense. I think I would like to think that we are gonna keep some of the new habits that people have adopted, including the fact that the world has become more digital, but to make it more resilient and more inclusive. So that's one. But I also feel that very quickly inertia can set in. So Israel, who's been so successful at rolling out the vaccines, is pretty much opening up now. And you can already see that all of the changes that we've seen in the education model are that there is an inertia to go back to how it used to be, instead of thinking deliberately, let's have a hybrid model and a much more flexible model, where depending on age groups, depending on subjects, depending on many, many other factors, you can balance it more on like a virtual learning versus in presence, but build in that flexibility and retain some of what we've learned, the new tools, the new habits, the new models into this new construct of bundled education, where people can choose much more what suits them at different stages. And education is actually a continuous thing through life, and just like you've made so much more accessible what you do to students and to people from all over the world, it's and it's something that you're going to lose. I would hope that we can do the same in critical sectors like health, education, etc. But I feel that we need to be very deliberate about it. Otherwise, inertia will set in and take us back to how it was.
That is fascinating. Irene, you mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, right? And there's one very close to my heart, the fifth one, so gender equality. And your career, you are clearly a role model for women around the world. You've succeeded in a sector that is probably mainly men dominated. Have there been any challenges that you face as a woman? And what would be your advice to women listening to us and admiring your career?
Thanks, Joanna. I think that women tend to want to be very, very, very prepared before taking a step, or before making a pitch, or before asking for a promotion, or whatever it is. And I found that in my career, having mentors and having a network has helped me generate the confidence to break that tendency a little bit, and gain the confidence to be as bold as often more men tend to be. So surrounding yourself with good mentors along the way, and building a network where it's not, less is more, but a network of people who are not just gonna be, there to make an introduction, but actually be there and go out of their way to proactively help you seize opportunities. It's very, very important. So when I, for example, decided that I wanted to go onto the investment track at IFC, no one had done that transition from advisory to investment. And the people working on investment were coming directly from more of a standardized model of MBA and investment banking, and being hired through that channel. But I had already built in a small network and trust of a couple of people who went out of the way to say, I'll give you the opportunity. You see if you fly or not, but I'll give you 1 year to work in the financial institutions group. And so the director from the team I was in allowed me to go and work for the financial institutions group for a year. I stayed 15. and that's where I kind of like made most of my career at IFC. So that's I think really important for women. Also in terms of the opportunities ahead, because, and Paul, you were asking what do I think the world is going to be post-pandemic, and I think it's going to require so many more solutions to more complex problems that require a lot more collaboration and critical thinking, technical skills, but also social-emotional skills. And I think women are very well or tend to be more suited to that. So I think it's a great time for us, a great time. And so just for women to sort of have the confidence to know that this is actually a great time for us. And finally, often I have a couple of kids, they are 6 and 7. And I never thought that would be a limiting factor in my career. And I think it's really important not to think in terms of things that are fundamental for what you want to do in life, as it could be building a family, to not let that, not to think about that as a constraint and how to work around it and fit in. Because eventually, if that is so important, other things will fit in around it. And as a matter of fact, probably my fastest progression was during the time that I gave birth to my kids. And I think it's important to turn the equation, not think about constraints, but think about those things that are so important for you that you want to pursue, and have the other things will find a way to fit around that. Of course, each person will find their own formula. In my case, I have an amazing husband who's supported me throughout my career and who's been really flexible. But it's not the only way of doing it. There are amazing women that I work with that don't have a partner and have made it work as well. So each person will also find their own formula to make that happen. But I did want to bring in the family issue, because I think often psychologically it seems as something that people think more in terms of constraint rather than turning things around.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. And it's great advice. It definitely applies to everyone, really, everyone listening as humans, building the future. And you have showed us a lot of opportunities ahead. It's going to be, Irene, very difficult for us to name this episode, because you've been through many careers and sectors. What a fascinating life and career. Thank you so much for being here with us today. It's been a pleasure.
Muchas gracias, Joanna. Yeah, thank you, Paul. It's been great meeting you.
Thanks a million. Yeah, no, it has. Absolutely fantastic.
Wow, that was a really excellent chat. Well done, Paul. What were your highlights?
Such a nice woman. And I suppose like the transitioning into different careers with the overall goal of helping people. Just fascinating hearing some of the stuff. I mean, she's working at a really high level, so it was excellent.
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah, I agree. It is interesting when you see more in depth from her how important it is for the public sector to work in collaboration with the private sector and incentivizing entrepreneurship, accelerating the development through those innovative partnerships. So yeah, really insightful. In fact, one of my favorite episodes so far. So I hope it's been really interesting for people too. And
that was a controversial. So your favorite episode so far?
One of my favorites. And one of 10. So probably shouldn't have said that.
We'll move on. You can reach us at howtobe-the-difference at theinterngroup.com or on social media at The Intern Group. And please don't forget to rate and subscribe. And until next time, we'll chat again. Thank you very much, Joanna.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you to Irene and the Inter-American Development Bank.
And thank you, of course, for listening as well.
Yes. See you next time.